morning to everyone and welcome to this first BRICS Digital Policies webinar that has been organized by the CyberBRICS project at the FGV, Fundação Getulio Vargas. Before we start, let me share with you the usual disclaimer. Every speaker in this webinar is only conveying his or her own opinion. It is not an official position of FGV, and of course everyone is participating, expressing his or her own informed consent about the recording of this webinar and then later the publication of the video. My name is Luca Belli. I'm professor of law at FGV Law School, and I'm also the coordinator of the CyberBRICS project. Together with our CyberBRICS research fellow today, we will explore some of the key new updates regarding digital policies in the BRICS area, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. We have with us Smriti Parsheera from India, Aaron Martin from Tilburg University, Wang from University of Hong Kong, Senka Hadzic from Research ICT Africa, Larissa from FGV, of course. Unfortunately, our Russian fellow, due to a last-minute impediment, could not participate, but we will be able to explore quite a wide array of issues today, so don't worry, you will not miss any special news about BRICS policies. Now, before we start, let me just share a couple of ideas about the project, what we do, and why we have started this research project about BRICS digital policies. On the CyberBRICS project, of course, you can find anything you want and you need to know about us on our website, cyberbrics.info, and also following us on Twitter on BRICS Cyber. The CyberBRICS project is led by FGV, but it has been conceived in partnership with key research institutions in the BRICS area, the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, the CIS, Center for Internet and Society in India, the University of Hong Kong and Fudan University in China, and last but of course not least, Research ICT Africa in South Africa. We have three main areas of research: cybersecurity, including data protection, the access policies and telecom policies of the BRICS area, which is our main research issue this year in 2020, and then the digitalization of public services and public administration in the BRICS area, which is going to be our main area of research next year. We developed three different pillars of action: research, of course, engagement with stakeholders, so we try to have a constant dialogue with the private sector, with academic community, of course, as we are all members of the academic community, but also with governments and civil society. And we try to map the policies that exist in order to distill good practices and then elaborate policy proposals. Being the CyberBRICS project, the first project in history that does these comparative studies of digital policies in the BRICS area, we have, you may imagine, a lot of work to do. And of course, we have decided to do this for key reasons. There is almost 40% of the world population in the BRICS countries, and almost 40% of the internet population is in the BRICS countries. So of course, the policies that BRICS countries are elaborating with regard to digital policies are not only influencing almost half of the world that lives in the BRICS, but also all the rest that wants to communicate with them or use the technology that they create. Now, all the research that we elaborate is available in open access on our website. You find a very vast array of publications. We are also going to release in a couple of months our first book, that is the result of last year research dedicated to cybersecurity regulations. We explored 5 main areas of cybersecurity: data protection, consumer protection, cybercrime, measures to maintain public order online, and cyber defense. We have not, of course, done exhaustive studies, for instance, cybersecurity measures with regard to internet access policies and telecommunications were excluded from last year study because we are also dealing with this year. So don't be afraid, you will receive analysis on almost every issue. We are also putting forward concrete recommendations, and we are one of the concrete examples was this article in China Today, the official press organ of the Chinese government, calling for data protection and cybersecurity norms be put forward by the BRICS, also the global level. This, of course, was in accordance with the previous BRICS engagement from the 2017 Xiamen Declaration, exactly in this direction, building global norms on data protection and cybersecurity. And we have seen very recently China proposing a new initiative on global data security norms. Now, no one better than our CyberBRICS fellow Wang can start providing us some insight on this. So, Wei, please, the floor is yours. We know that China has proposed this recent initiative. What's about this data security, global data security initiative, and what could be the consequences?
Thanks, Luca. So I will share with you the several slides. Sorry. All fine? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Luca. Yes. I would express my thanks to Luca for his invitation organization. I'm happy to know that there will be a further research plan for CyberBRICS Digital Policies. Kudos to you, Luca. So I was told to bring some emerging topics and the news to the webinar. So I'm going to share with you some recent initiatives introduced by China. The first piece of news is about the global initiative on data security introduced by the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang at an international seminar in Beijing. The initiative aims at seizing digital opportunities for cooperation and development in the official narrative. It was also stressed to develop a set of international rules and data security and reflect the will and respect of the interest of all countries. China Foreign Minister spokesperson Zhao Lijian said at Tuesday's media briefing that the initiative aims to safeguard global data and supply chain security, promote the development of the digital economy, and provide a blueprint for the formulation of global rules. Basically, the Wall Street Journal reported that it was to urge countries to handle data security in a comprehensive, objective, and evidence-based manner, and respect other countries' sovereignty in how they handle data, in line with Beijing's version of cyber sovereignty. And in response to the Clean Network initiative rolled out by the United States government to exclude Chinese technology firms perceived as threatening national security. Since time's limited, I will just ignore the principles. So in line with the data security initiative on September 7th, the Beijing administration just introduced 3 governmental policy documents about building a digital trade pilot zone and setting up an international big data exchange. The details on the ongoing pilot project on the secure management of cross-border data flows were reviewed by the Beijing Cyber and the Information Office. Basically, the Beijing version of big data exchange seems to be different from that of Guiyang, which deals with the domestic data flows. Beijing will permit the construction of a digital trade pilot zone, a big data exchange, and the regulations on cross-border data flows, and launch a package of policies around technological innovation. The Beijing International Big Data Exchange will integrate the data element resources, regulate data trading behavior, promote network sharing, efficient use of data elements, and guide the concentration of data elements to develop, to advance the productivity to help Beijing's industrial upgrading and a high quality economy. So that's the two pieces I want to share with you. So I look
Excellent.
forward to.
Thank you very much, Wei. Thank you very much, Wei. We have seen that there is some concrete movement towards global rule setting, and on the other hand, toward a concrete implementation of new initiatives on big data international exchange. Now, we have also seen that there has been some updates in the ongoing Cold War between the US and China, technological Cold War, at least. With regard to the most outspoken quarrel we have witnessed over the past weeks, the TikTok quarrel, in an unexpected twist, only last week, the Chinese administration has updated its export control catalog, including also within the list of technologies that need a specific approval of the Chinese government. Also, the algorithms that platforms like and applications like TikTok run. So, Aaron Martin, you are not only one of our CyberBRICS fellows, you're also a researcher at the Tilburg University and the lead of the DataJust project. Now, what is your analysis about this recent news from China?
Thank you, Luca. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Yeah, as Wei pointed out, there's been this ongoing, you call it a Cold War, some call it the digital Cold War between China and the US. And there's been a lot of back and forth about sort of control over technology and infrastructure within the digital realm. So as many people know, TikTok is a Chinese company. It's owned by a Chinese internet firm called ByteDance. And ByteDance has been looking to sell the US operations of its TikTok subsidiary ever since the US government and the Trump administration in particular started proposing a ban on the service due to supposed national security concerns. And specifically, there are some worries about data sharing between TikTok and ByteDance and the Chinese government. Now, the prospective buyers for TikTok include a coalition between Microsoft, the US technology giant, and Walmart, which is somewhat odd. And another group of potential buyers is led by the US tech company Oracle. So that's the background. In late August, as Luca mentioned, the Chinese government updated its export control rules to cover a variety of technologies it deems sensitive. And this includes technology that sounds a lot like what TikTok does in terms of personalization through its recommendation engine. And specifically, the language in the export controls update focuses on personalized information recommendation services based on data analysis. So if in fact this covers TikTok's algorithm, it means that ByteDance would need to seek Chinese government approval before it could reach a deal with foreign buyers. Now, this could result in protracted discussions with Chinese authorities about what parts of the company are covered by the new rules. Now, as I mentioned, this rule change emerges as part of a broader, longer running overhaul of China's trade controls, which has been, it's been beefing up since the beginning of this trade war with the US. Now, Beijing's supposed assertion of authority in this case is, as Luca points out, unexpected. Some believe it's a signal of China's intention to dictate terms over a potential deal through though other experts say it remains unclear whether the Chinese government would go so far as to block the sale of TikTok. Most people believe there are other Chinese companies that are much more important from a sovereignty perspective, Huawei being one of them. Unlike the United States, China has a small and very rarely used set of export controls, which so far have been mostly deployed on rare earth metals found in consumer electronics like smartphones. Now, it's unclear how ByteDance could potentially sort of find a politically acceptable solution to sell off its US operations without sharing its code base. If Beijing blocks the sale of TikTok, it would force the US government to go through with banning the app and potentially incurring the wrath of its legions of users, billions and billions of users. Ordering companies like Apple and Google to take down TikTok and app stores globally could also prompt further anger against the Trump administration and even lawsuits, some say. For me, what's encouraging is this might be the moment when America's youth get smart to questions of digital policy and geopolitics. So this is something to watch. And in the next couple of weeks, we should know a bit more about how this is all developing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. And actually, there was also another, to conclude with China, there was also a very interesting announcement that was only shared a couple of days ago about, it also confirms China's yearning to reaffirm its global status. The Chinese government is currently piloting a digital yuan in several major cities, including Shenzhen, that is controlled by the Bank of China. It will be pegged one-to-one with the RMB. And the aim is to create a new sort of digital currency, cryptocurrency made in China that aims, of course, to challenge the global currency status of the US dollar. So what do you think, Aaron, what is your analysis also of this emerging struggle between China and the US?
Indeed. So as you pointed out, last week, China announced the expansion of tests for the central bank-led digital yuan project. And the trials are expected to commence in major cities across the most developed regions of China. It's a long list of areas and sort of important cities that will be trialing the digital currency. Now, I should point out that as of this week, a lot of details are still not very well known about the project and how it's going to work in practice, but it's believed that users will be able to download a digital wallet onto their cell phones, fill it with money from their bank account, similar to going to a cash machine. And they would then use that money, known as a digital currency electronic payment, like cash, to make and receive payments directly with anyone else who has a digital wallet. Now, I think there's some important things to point out about this project, because there's some misconceptions out there. It's not a cryptocurrency project, although sometimes it's inaccurately referred to as one. As you point out, Luca, the new digital currency is expected to be pegged one-to-one with the existing renminbi. And in fact, the project was started by a former governor of the central bank who wanted to protect China from having to someday adopt a standard like Bitcoin, which is designed and controlled by others. It's a decentralized platform. Now, I think there's some interesting questions that follow from these developments. One of those is around how this will impact on the big tech companies in China, including Ant Group, which runs Alipay, and Tencent, which operates WeChat, which already offers some hugely popular payment services. Of course, there's also questions about how this will impact on some of the other non-Chinese platforms like Facebook's Libra currency, which is also still under development. And as always, it's hard to predict what will happen with these sorts of developments, but some believe that the digital currency will prove as important in the history of global currencies as the gold standard was and the Bretton Woods system was in terms of pegging exchange rates to the US dollar. I think we'll see in the coming weeks, months, and years whether this is the case.
Yeah, I mean, this is something to watch indeed. And before we proceed, let me also remind that if any of the people that is following us in this moment wants to share any questions, there is a link in the YouTube description that allows you also to share questions. Our CyberBRICS project coordinator, Walter, is also collecting all your questions. So if you have any doubt, if you following us want to ask anything particular, please feel free to share your question. We will have time at the end of the webinar for at least 10 minutes of debate. Now, moving to India. India has been hitting the headlines over the past months for his new data protection framework that has been actually in the pipelines since a couple of years now. But very recently, the government has shared a new report on with key normative and institutional recommendation for non-personal data. And this has also triggered a lot of critiques and reaction in the Indian observers. Smriti, Parsheera, you are our CyberBRICS fellow analyzing India. Please let us know what is happening with this non-personal data initiative.
Thank you. Thanks, Luca. I'm just going to start sharing my screen, but meanwhile, it's great to be a part of this conversation. Okay, so yeah, as you mentioned, for about 2 years, we've been having this conversation on personal data in India, but only much recently, the government set up this committee, which was sort of multi-stakeholder in ways. So it was not a pure government committee, and they submitted their report to the government in July, and that's been put out for consultation. So I'll just give you a broad overview of some of the recommendations that this committee has made, and then the concerns that have come up from the technology policy community in India as a response. So broadly, what this committee is talking about, they're talking about the regulation of data, which is not personally identifier, so the non-personal part of the data. And they categorize this into 3 categories. They say one kind of data is public data, which is what is collected and generated by the government through public funds. The other is purely private data, which private entities collect. And the third category they introduce is something called community data. And they define the community as some group of people with shared and common interests and data pertaining to them. All of us on this call in that sense are a sort of community, and data pertaining to this call then becomes a community data. And then they go on to talk about the different kind of stakeholders that they envisage in the system. So they talk about the data principal, which could be the individual, the corporate, or the community to whom the data pertains. There is a data custodian, which is similar to the, the data controller under the GDPR, so to speak, which is the person who makes decisions about how the data is to be processed. There is a data trustee. So the thinking is that, when we're talking about community data, very often these are individuals who are unconnected in ways and not able to, get together and exercise bargaining power. So someone has to act on their behalf and in their interest. And they say that this should be an institution in the form of a trust, and you need a trustee who will then act on behalf of the community. But what they also say is that very often it could just be the relevant ministry of the government which acts as this trustee. So if you're talking about data of a group of people in a certain area, it could be the municipality there which acts as the trustee and makes decisions on their behalf. So moving from the categorization, the kind of recommendations they make is one, they try to equate non-personal data to personal data in some senses and try to extend similar protection. So they talk about consent, which is of course a fundamental pillar in the privacy context. They talk about bringing that to the non-personal data context and saying that even when you're dealing with anonymized personal data such that it's not personal anymore, you need to take consent of the individuals in advance before collecting and processing that data. They say that, if you're collecting data above a certain threshold, you become a data business. And while these thresholds haven't been set, some obligations have been suggested, like an obligation that, if you're a data business, you will have to put out the records of all the metadata that you collect, which entities are you collecting data from, what does this data pertain to, so that third parties who want to utilize the data, whether the government or smaller businesses, then know that you have this data and they have a way to reach out to you through a regulatory mechanism that has been proposed. They talk about this kind of data sharing obligations where they're saying if it's private data, you still need to share all of this in the raw form. And if you're adding value and it becomes more and more processed data, there could be requirements to pay for it, but the raw data has to be shared freely. They talk about an architecture to implement all of this. So they talk about how the security of the data will function, the API access to get access to all of this data. And finally, they talk about a regulatory authority, a new agency, which is both the enabler of this ecosystem and is the enforcement agency for this ecosystem. But as you rightly mentioned, Luca, this has led to a lot of concerns because as you can see from the recommendations here, it's pretty wide-ranging, widespread, intrusive in terms of business practices with the aim of, benefiting a social and economic good coming out of it. But the concerns that have come out is that one, while making these proposing these solutions, it hasn't really been articulated whether, for the problem that has been identified, which is that, certain businesses hoard a lot of data and the society and the state are not benefiting, whether this is really the least intrusive and the least coercive way to achieve the objective of opening up that data. It talks about empowering the community, but many of us have the fear that in the name of empowering the community, it's actually ending up empowering the state, because the state is the one which will exercise that agency on behalf of the community. The state is also sometimes the data controller, sometimes it will be the regulator. So that kind of conflict of interest will come out of these proposals. There's an issue with that, the fact that many of the concepts are being borrowed from the personal data context, but may not be as equally or, reasonably applicable in this context. For instance, if you say you must always act in the best interest of the, principle, may or may not work in a non-personal data sort of context, or you may stop innovation and competition by, extending some of these obligations without too much thought. And finally, of course, this new agency is being proposed in a context where we already have a competition authority. We have the proposal for a new, data, personal data regulator. There are sectoral regulators. So how all of this will be harmonized and work together, that's something which the report doesn't really talk about in enough detail.
Thank you very much, Smriti. And actually, another piece of news that was quite discussed lately in India was the Node consultation, this national open digital ecosystem consultation. We know that India has been promoting a lot the creation, establishment of a solid national digital ecosystem, even with some digital sovereignty flavors. So what is this consultation about, and how is this being organized?
Right, sure. So I'll proceed to discuss that, and this is a broad framework of what this paper, the consultation paper, which was put out, the process has now closed and they're in the process of reviewing the, contributions that have been made. But really what the Node strategy paper is talking about is building what they call government tech 3.0. So they say there's been a transition in the role of the government in the digital ecosystem. This is, say, in the first stage of this, process, the focus was on automation. So it was about specific processes and it was about how do you digitize certain records. So it was a very focused intervention. The next, stage in the life cycle of this was about building ecosystems, where you're talking about end-to-end digitization, creating government portals, e-governance, etc. And what this paper is saying is now we are in the phase of creating ecosystems. So, this is how they define a node. I have the definition up on the slide. They talk about creating open delivery platforms where basically the government acting along with private actors will create these systems where, a certain technology will be adopted. So they say this could be applicable to multiple sectors like health, agriculture, skills ecosystems. And the idea is that the government will get involved in thinking about what is the underlying technology that is required for interoperability and for bringing up this sector. Then there will be a layer of governance mechanisms, which will be, what sort of institutional structure do you need? What kind of data security that you need? Because this whole framework is about, leveraging data and using it for service delivery through multiple actors. And then finally, that idea of multiple actors leads to, a community coming up where they talk about end users, but also at the provider end, the state is involved, and there could be a bunch of, a lot of private actors who will act along with the state, both in developing the technology as well as in final rollout and in business delivery. But like in case of the nodes ecosystem, there have been a couple of concerns which have come up around this framework, and I'll briefly touch on some of the key points which my colleagues have talked about and others in the tech ecosystem here in India have been talking about. So the first issue, of course, is that when you try to propose a solution which is overarching in this way, it can somehow blur the boundaries and requirements of specific sectors. So as we know, each sector has its own issues and market failures and the need for state involvement, and sometimes involvement by the state could really make things worse. So this kind of an overarching framework could potentially be problematic in that sense. The other idea is that when you have this kind of centralization of the governance model, you create a system where, while you may spur, innovation in the short run, but in the long run, you will not be able to have competing systems because the government has put its firepower behind one particular model and one particular ecosystem. So the chances of a competing ecosystem coming and doing the same thing in health or, skills development is unlikely that it will happen. This question of openness, because the nodes, the O in the nodes is about openness, but they sort of mix up concepts of openness here. So, there is, precedent in India. There are policies about free and open software, about how, open systems need to be developed, but that's somehow not being reflected here. And when they talk about openness, it's one, they refer to open APIs, and they refer to openness in the sense that multiple players can participate in this system, which is really a little different from how a lot of other players in this system think about openness in such systems. Next, as you know, we are still in the process of developing a data protection law. So for all of this to proceed, that becomes really worrying, because you're talking about state intervention in a lot of data being collected and analyzed and used by third parties without the benefit of that legal protection. And similarly, constitutional issues like, can there be arbitrariness in terms of who the states engage with? When they engage with private actors in developing this tech, there could be concerns about, how did they choose particular actors? Did someone get excluded, both in participating as a developer of the ecosystem and as an end user? Also, there are these concerns of exclusion. So, I mean, these are all, proposals that people have put in, and we're waiting to see how the strategy goes from here.
And actually, this interest of the Indian government for GovTech and this idea of developing a strategy for digitalization of public administrations is, of course, extremely important for our project and for our upcoming analysis precisely on the digitalization of public administration. And I also think the current research of our CyberBRICS visiting professor Ian Brown on interoperability may be extremely relevant to try to contribute actively to the development of these policies. Now, moving from one continent to another, Brazil. Brazil, the tropical giant, has been discussed at length over the past couple of years for his successes in the creation of new progressive laws, the Marco Civil, for the great achievement of a new data protection law, the LGPD, which is the acronym of Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados. But so far, no one knew when the LGPD would have finally entered in force. It was also enter in force in January of 2020. It was first postponed to August. Then two other attempts of postponing it were put forward by the government and by the presidency. But then finally, almost like in a miracle, we now know that the LGPD will soon enter in force. Larissa Galdino, you are a postdoc researcher at FGV. You are dealing with the Brazilian analysis. Please, what's new with the LGPD?
Okay, thank you, Luca. It's my pleasure to be here. You share my presentation. Okay, just a minute, please. Okay. Today I talk about the presentation discussion on change regarding they validate the general data protection law, as Lucas say, and as you can see, the last 20 years you running for building the good regulations about data protection law, and now you expand the create of the authority and challenge for city. You have a lot of talents for citizens and business, and this scenario there is also have the proposal for fake news bills to create the new law, but you have a lot of problems related about the freedom, expression, and privacy in Brazil. So about the data protection law, as you can see, the general data protection law usually governs the curation of the sensitive data from the collection and process of data, and you have the impact in campaigns and citizens and the public sector. And with the law, all these actors, you have the new rights and duties, and you have to organize a new practice to deal with data. So the general data protection law, now you have expected for the National Data Protection Authority, it expected to monitor the compliance with the rules. However, the body has not been actively created by the executive until now, because the executive issued a decree with the structure of the authority, but is still naming its advisors, and this is result like only on paper. So this exercise of the law depends on the clarify the definition of the composition of the authority and the link between the presidents of the Republic. It's appear the independence of the authority may be limited. In addition, maybe you have the lack of the authority leads to legal process as the punishment and the law you valid only in the next August, like Luca said. So what's the meaning? What's the direct impacts of the situation right now? First, it's not clear for campaigns and the business the rules about data protection officer, because the campaigns need to clarify some points and questions about care of internal data for employees, for example, and the external data when the campaigns, when the process of the personal data, it's part of the performance of the business. Is the second impact for me, it's much important of the law and the Personal Data Protection Authority, it's on the citizen. It's because it's the challenge to create the data protection culture in Brazil. The citizens need to know how to protect their records, report abuse, and organize the competence bodies. All the scenario, you have the impact too, and the fake news of bill. You need to consider is because now you have the proposal, but the proposal has the problems too. And again, it's very important to clarify the composition of the fake news of bill. In this approach, because this approach just focuses on the ability of digital media to facilitate the circulation of the contents. And this includes the dissemination of the false information, fake news. So the proposal, the text does not have a direct approach in the responsibility of the platforms and the target market. I want to remember the market is related to fake news or false information when the personal data collected can facilitate the mechanism for distribution misleading messages. For example, the Supreme Court, Electoral Court in Brazil have a resolution about the contracts with the market campaigns for elections. It's necessary the user personal data must be complying with the law's criteria. Sorry, I just forget about the fake news. Just remember the important points right now for us for thinking about the fake news proposal, okay? For all the reason I say it's important to the data authority to monitor data protection for users in Brazil, especially right now for electoral, is evident it. And you have a lot of criticism about the proposed law. First, because you don't have the transparency and in the situation, the transparency must be the rule for all the automated process. You have machine learning, algorithms, etc. And again, the tracking private messages has impact on the freedom of expression. So you need to be careful about the articles and proposal. And the procedures for content moderation mechanism is not clear. You don't know about the transparency, you don't know about the report of the information that the platform should provide. And just for finish, you don't have a user identification can facilitate abuse or mechanism for dissemination of the procedures. And again, you have to need careful. It's not clear all the articles about use the the identification. So note this, you have a lot of implications for general data law protection law and personal data and authority too. So you cannot you need running together, and you need like a synergy between data protection law and authority for providing the spread of fake news in Brazil.
Thank you very much, Larissa. And yes, as you were mentioning, there has been the two main debates lately in Brazil about digital policies have been centered on the entry in force of the LGPD, the law that will partly enter in force probably in days as soon as the President Bolsonaro will sign it with his presidential sanction, but the sanctions of the LGPD have been deferred. And the entry in force of the sanctions has been deferred to next year, to next August. So there we will have probably the part of the law already in force, the sanctions only in force next year, and the new data protection regulator whose structure has been defined now, but has not yet been created. And it's a central piece, of course, of the Brazilian data protection framework, still has to be created, and nobody knows precisely when it will be created. And as you were mentioning, in an electoral year, Brazil will have municipal elections in October, November, and this will be extremely key to have should be a priority to have a data protection authority, but so far we haven't seen it. Of course, these will also have an impact with the fake news bill that you were mentioning, that also has divided a lot, both academics and civil society, as regards the need to reformulate or not the current text of the bill. Now let's move to another country, South Africa, the African country, and specifically South Africa. Senka, Hadzic, you are not only researcher at Research ICT Africa, but also our CyberBRICS fellow that has the responsibility to analyze South African digital policies. We know that very recently, ICASA, the independent telecoms regulator of South Africa, has postponed a much awaited spectrum auctions, also due to the current pandemic context. So what is happening with this spectrum auction that was already planned for next year, right? For this year, right?
Thanks, Luca, for the introduction and for organizing this seminar. So basically, after postponing the spectrum auction several times already, this year ICASA has again failed their own deadline on 30th of June 2020. And right now the plan is to publish the ITA, the invitation to apply for both the high demand spectrum and the wholesale open access network by the end of this month. This time, the delay was basically impacted by prioritizing the release of the COVID-19 emergency spectrum in April this year, with the idea to provide relief to incumbent operators so that they can meet the increased demand for broadband during lockdown, because suddenly we had a lot of homeschooling, remote work. So basically the demand for high-speed access was much higher than usual. And at Research ICT Africa, we criticized this move for having favored incumbent operators and not using this as an opportunity to encourage innovation and address the issue of digital inclusion, because in South Africa still around 50% of the population is offline. And in fact, one of the dominant players who got the emergency spectrum turned this allocation to launch 5G services. And obviously this happened in major metropolitan areas. So who will benefit from it are essentially their most affluent customers, and not those who we are like trying to bring online. Anyway, this free temporary spectrum will be closed at the end of November, and then it will be placed on auction. And according to the minister, the wholesale open access network is still a priority. And the government does recognize that there are over 400 players in the country who hold electronic communication service licenses, but they are not able to access spectrum. And the fact that no new spectrum has been allocated to operators in the past 14 years is one of the biggest obstacles to reducing the data prices in South Africa. And yeah, we are hoping to see some changes and price reductions in 2021 after the auction, and hopefully bring also more people online.
Thank you for this, Senka. And actually, you and together with your Research ST Africa colleagues and our board member, Alison Gilwell, penned a very interesting article on innovative spectrum strategies that was also published on our website. Very interesting to know how this is evolving, specifically to understand how these spectrum auctions will be utilized to expand access and expand connectivity in the country, and if these may or may not be considered as a good practice to be replicated elsewhere. Another very important point that has been discussed, actually that is discussed since a couple of years but had some turning points lately in South Africa, was POPIA, the Protection of Personal Information Act, first issued in 2013, but then enacted with a quite lethargic strategy. Very recently in July, there were some key developments with regard to the enactment of new sections. So and this is also very important in the current context of data leaks and explosion of new malicious attacks. So Senka, what's happening with POPIA?
Yeah, so in late June, the president announced that more sections of the act would come into force on 1st of July. And well, due to the very wide definition of the term personal information, the commencement of the act will have far-reaching implications for responsible parties. And talking about data breaches, so that term, well, generally refers to the access or acquisition of personal information by an unauthorized person. And according to the Act, where a data breach occurs, there is an obligation of the responsible party to report the breach to the information regulator and to the affected data subject. Yes, lately there have been quite a few data breaches in South Africa, and a major one happened in August last month, when the South African branch of the Consumer Credit Reporting Agency, Experian, disclosed a data breach which has compromised personal information of 24 million South Africans. And this number was not even disclosed by Experian itself. It was reported by the South African Banking Risk Center, which is a anti-fraud and banking non-profit organization. And following this incident, Experian South Africa stated that the authorities, including the information regulator and other major stakeholders, were notified. However, the information regulator then issued a media statement saying that Experian has not informed them whether or not it has notified the affected data subjects of this security compromise, and that they also have not fully complied with the notification requirements. So the regulator would have to follow up in this regard, because the Act clearly states that notifications must be made as soon as reasonably possible after the discovery of a compromise. However, the information regulator only received the report from Experian 3 weeks later. And this is one of the 4 major data breaches in South Africa this year, and only in the last 4 months, the regulator has recorded 25 data breaches, out of which 19 were self-reported. So yes, it's increasingly becoming a serious issue.
And actually, what we are witnessing in all BRICS countries, and also probably due to the COVID-19 pandemic as an accelerator of the already ongoing tendencies, is really a concrete move towards digitalization, but also the need to cope with increased threats, a very unstable international context with struggle between states, and even sometimes concrete frictions between BRICS states themselves. The last point that we want to discuss today before opening for debate was, of course, the elaboration of a new digital society plan in Russia. Unfortunately, we do not have our CyberBRICS fellow from Russia, Anya Orlova, able to join us today. But what is very interesting to analyze from Russia is also the will, the concrete will to implement this digital society program that aims at expanding the use of artificial intelligence and the use of robotics, and implement it concretely at large scale within the Russian Federation from 2020 to 2024. So these 4 years of already implementation of artificial intelligence solution, robotic solution, concrete move toward automation, digitalization, what some observer may call the 4th industrial revolution, a term that is often used and abused. So before we start to see also in the BRICS countries what has been the concrete impact of COVID-19, the current pandemics on digitalization, what have been the initiatives and if impacts that we have witnessed, I would just like to see if there is any question for our from the people that is following us. I do not see any questions so far. So excellent. So we can proceed in our last 7 minutes before we conclude with a little bit of debates. So I would like to have a quick round of impressions from our fellows about what have been what do you think has been the concrete impact on the current pandemic on the elaboration of policies? What if you have a couple of examples of digital policies, or Senka, you for instance, you were mentioning the fact that ICASA, at least ICASA has offered as an explanation for the postponing the current of the spectrum auction, the current pandemic. What in your opinion has been the impact of the current situation of smart working, lockdown, data leaks, malicious attacks on the posture of your countries of analysis? I don't know who would like to start first. Be my guest.
Should I go first?
Yes, please, go, Smriti.
Okay, so I mean, in terms of the developments in India, of course, as you said, everything has moved digital and moved online rapidly without much expectation and preparedness. And what it has done, similar to South Africa, is highlighted the digital divide. And one of the current issues which has been talked about is about exams going online, so a lot of competitive exams where students have been preparing for a couple of years, which was meant to happen on paper or happen in particular centers, have now suddenly, without much preparation, decided that they're going to go online. And that's thrown up these huge issues about, the kind of devices people have, the connectivity to, sustain for 2-3 hours in that, the fixed bandwidth speed that you require for online proctoring to ensure people are not cheating. So that's like really, of course, classes going online has thrown up these long-term kind of issues, but the exam has been like something which is really highlighted and come to the fore in the past few weeks particularly.
Indeed, I mean, you strike a very good chord, which is the fact that this transition from offline to online life has happened suddenly with really very little preparation, and it doesn't seem that, at least with a few exceptions, it doesn't seem that there is a strong strategy regarding how to cope with it, especially in the short term, as we still witness the ramping pandemic. Who wants to go next?
I will make a brief comment. So I'll use this opportunity to shamelessly plug a book that we just published on data justice in COVID-19. It includes over 30 essays on the impact of the pandemic in terms of governance and technology across a number of different countries. We have contributions from Brazil, China, Wang was involved in that, and South Africa. Colleagues of Senka wrote from the South African perspective. And we cover a lot of ground. So for those who are interested, it's open access. We're looking to expand the collection to do a second series of essays. And hopefully we'll have contributions from Russia and India in that second wave. So please download the book and send us your feedback.
Yeah, of course, you also find it, if you look for it on our CyberBRICS website, you can download it. And I will also take advantage to shamelessly advertise an upcoming booklet on the value of internet openness in times of crisis, that will consolidate some of the publications that have already been published, some of the essays that have already been published by our fellows, some publications by Smriti, Senka, and also some new publications that will also be presented at the upcoming online IGF in November. Now, if everyone else wants to shamelessly advertise publications or provide insight on the impact of the pandemic, we still have 2 minutes, and then we can close our first webinar.
Okay, hey Luca. I want to highlight some very important point in Brazil. It's about socio-digital inequalities. I think it's the most, you highlight more right now because you don't have governance of data for everyone. And I have some questions about the fake news of bill, because the fake news of bill requires the sublimation of the 2 documents to obtain a prepaid cell phone number. And this definitely forces and burdens the citizens to regularize documents. And just remind me about the case of the Latino immigrants in the USA and the process to requesting documents and social security, where the fear of the surveillance increases the social inclusion. And maybe if you don't resolve this in Brazil, you'll go for the same away. It's my point.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what seems to be extremely evident, especially in developing countries, pardon me if I use this not very political, maybe expression, is exactly the fact that the pandemics has increased, has made very deep the already existing divides, social, economical divides, including digital divides, where a lot of people that simply do not have access to internet are simply cut off life, social life or working opportunities. And even as you were rightly pointing out, and you have also authored a very interesting article on the case, analyzing the case of Sao Paulo, where the municipality plans policies trying to utilize data. When you cannot collect data on specific populations of on specific areas, it simply means that those populations, those areas will be cut out of the planning. So this exactly exacerbates enormously the divide we already witness, especially in Latin America, but of course also in other developing countries. Do we have any final remarks before we conclude?
Basically, I would like to link digital yuan to the pandemic. In my opinion, I think digital yuan is a link to the strategy of fintech industry in China. And basically in the pandemic, if you pay for bills with paper money, it's a little bit possible for you to spread the virus. But for now, the mobile payment or something, the digital payment system will just probably help to go through this kind of hardship. So yes, very.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, I mean, the fact that the digital yuan has been also put forward as a solution to limit physical contact and go digital. Of course, one has to consider also that all digital payments may be tracked much easier in a much easier way, and so it adds a layer of complexity to the payments organization, which is also transforming payments into a easily trackable activity. And of course, how this will evolve is exactly will be defined in the final design of the digital yuan that we will probably see by the end of the year. Now is being piloted in various cities. There is no yet a final design for it, but it will be indeed extremely interesting to see how this will evolve, and also if this will be utilized out of China, out of the Chinese border. Now, I would like to thank everyone for your attention and for your excellent contributions. This has been an incredibly interesting experience, our first BRICS Digital Policies webinar. We will organize many more. We will also stay tuned because we will soon release also our BRICS Digital Policy Observatory. We are reaching the 10th issue of the BRICS Observatory. So next week we will have a special issue dedicated to digital policies and COVID-19 in the BRICS countries. Of course, not only about this, but the lion's share of the upcoming bulletin will be dedicated to the interaction between COVID-19 and digital policies. Thank you very much to everyone for your attention, and we will see you at the next BRICS Digital Policy webinar.
Thank you, Luca.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thanks.